put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The Billion-Dollar Ghost: How one man erased history's oldest bank in 72 hours. In February 1995, a 233-year-old institution vanished overnight. Not from fire, not from war, not from market collapse. It disappeared because of one man sitting in a cramped Singapore office, typing numbers into a computer screen at 3 a.m. Numbers that didn't exist. Trades that never happened. Losses hidden in an account that was never supposed to be opened. When they finally found it, the damage was so catastrophic that Britain's oldest merchant bank, the institution that financed the Napoleonic Wars, that bankrolled empires, that survived 2 world wars, ceased to exist within 72 hours. This is the story of how Nick Leeson became the most infamous rogue trader in history, and how the dark machinery of financial deception can destroy centuries of legacy in less time than it takes to fly from London to Singapore. What happened in that office wasn't just fraud, it was financial murder. February 23, 1995. Peter Barings, the chairman of Barings Bank, receives a phone call that will haunt him for the rest of his life. His star trader in Singapore, the 28-year-old Nick Leeson, has disappeared, vanished into thin air. Left behind is a note. "I'm sorry." 3 days later, auditors discover something that shouldn't exist. A hidden account labeled 88888 buried in the trading records. Inside it, they find losses of £827 million. In today's money, that's over $2 billion. More than the entire capital reserve of the bank. More than the bank could ever hope to recover. The revelation spreads through London's financial district like a virus. Within hours, Barings Bank, the institution that once held the Queen's personal fortune, is insolvent. By the weekend, it's sold to ING Group for £1 British. £1 for 233 years of history. But the real mystery wasn't how it happened. It was how nobody saw it coming until it was far too late to save anything. To understand this dark business story, you have to go back to where it started. With a working-class kid from Watford who never graduated university, who somehow talked his way into the gilded halls of London's most prestigious financial institution. Nick Leeson wasn't born into wealth or power. He was the son of a plasterer. He attended a comprehensive school, not Eton or Harrow like most Barings bankers. But he had something the old money aristocrats didn't: hunger. That dangerous combination of ambition and insecurity that makes people do extraordinary things, both brilliant and terrible. In 1989, he joined Barings as a clerk in the settlements office, the back office, the unglamorous world of paperwork and trade confirmations. While traders upstairs made millions in bonuses, Leeson was stuck fixing their mistakes. But he learned something crucial in that basement office. He learned how the system worked. More importantly, he learned where the blind spots were. By 1992, Barings needed someone to set up their new trading operation in Singapore. Someone who understood both trading and settlements. Someone hungry enough to work 80-hour weeks in a sweltering Southeast Asian office. Nick Leeson volunteered. He was 25 years old. What happened next was a masterclass in how organizational dysfunction creates monsters. Barings made a decision that would prove fatal. They allowed Leeson to run both the trading floor and the settlements office in Singapore. In every other major financial institution, these functions are religiously separated. Traders execute deals. Settlements officers verify and record them. It's the financial equivalent of having the same person write checks and reconcile the bank account. But Barings' management in London, disconnected by 6,000 miles and seduced by Leeson's early profits, never questioned this arrangement. They handed him the keys to both the vault and the ledger book. What could possibly go wrong? At first, everything went spectacularly right. Leeson's strategy was simple: arbitrage trading between the Singapore and Osaka futures exchanges. He'd buy Nikkei futures contracts in Singapore, where they were cheap, and simultaneously sell them in Osaka, where they were expensive. Pocket the difference. Low risk, steady profits. Boring, methodical work. By 1993, he was reportedly generating £10 million in profits for Barings, nearly 10% of the bank's entire annual profit. In London, the executives were thrilled. Here was this working-class kid from Watford outperforming their Oxbridge-educated elite traders. They called him the Turbo. They gave him bigger trading limits. They paid him bigger bonuses. They never asked the fundamental question that should haunt every risk manager. If this strategy is so safe and profitable, why isn't everyone doing it? But behind the reported profits, a different story was unfolding in the shadows. In July 1992, one of Leeson's traders made a small mistake, a £20,000 loss on an unauthorized trade. Nothing catastrophic. The kind of error that happens daily in trading operations worldwide. But instead of reporting it, Leeson made a decision that would eventually destroy everything. He opened a secret account. Account number 88888. In Chinese culture, 8 is a lucky number. Leeson would need all the luck he could get. He buried the loss in this hidden account and told himself it was temporary. He'd make the money back with a few good trades and close it out. Nobody would ever know. This is how financial monsters are born. Not with grand schemes of theft, but with small lies told to protect your reputation. One trade at a time. One deception layered on another, until the lie becomes so massive that the truth would destroy you. The problem with secret accounts is that they never stay small. More mistakes happened. More losses piled up. Soon, Leeson wasn't just hiding errors by junior traders. He was hiding his own mounting losses from increasingly desperate bets. He abandoned his safe arbitrage strategy and began making massive directional bets on the Nikkei index. If the market went up, he'd make millions and could finally close out account 88,888. If it went down, the losses would compound. This wasn't trading anymore. It was gambling. But here's where the corporate scandal deepens. Back in London, Barings executives were too busy celebrating Leeson's reported profits to notice the warning signs flashing red. They never questioned why their Singapore office needed such enormous cash transfers to fund margin calls. They never investigated why Leeson's low-risk arbitrage strategy required him to take massive positions in the futures market. They didn't want to know. He was making them rich. Then came January 17th, 1995. The day everything accelerated toward catastrophe. At 5:46 a.m., the earth beneath Kobe, Japan, began to rupture. The Great Hanshin earthquake, magnitude 6.9, devastated one of Japan's most important industrial cities. Over 6,000 people died. The city was destroyed. And in Singapore, Nick Leeson watched his terminal screen in horror as the Nikkei index began to plummet. He had bet everything on the market going up. Now it was collapsing. A rational trader would have cut his losses immediately, admitted defeat, taken the hit. But Leeson was no longer thinking rationally. He was thinking like a desperate man who sees the walls closing in. Instead of selling his positions, he doubled down. He bought more Nikkei futures, trying to single-handedly prop up the market. He was trying to fight the financial gravity of an entire country's economic crisis. What happened next revealed the most terrifying truth about this business crime. Nick Leeson, a 28-year-old trader, briefly controlled trading positions so large that he accounted for nearly half the open interest in Nikkei futures on the Singapore exchange. His positions were so massive, they were moving the entire market. And still, nobody in London noticed. The losses in account 88,888 began hemorrhaging at a rate of tens of millions per day. To cover the margin calls, the cash required to keep his positions open, Leeson started requesting massive fund transfers from London. £50 million here, £100 million there. He told his superiors the money was needed for client positions. They believed him. They wired the money. All of it went straight into the black hole of account 88,888. By mid-February, Barings had sent over £742 million to Singapore. Nearly the entire capital of the bank was now sitting in Nick Leeson's secret account, evaporating by the hour. But here's what makes this financial mystery truly disturbing. Multiple people tried to raise red flags. Internal auditors in London questioned the Singapore operation. Regulators in Singapore asked about Barings' enormous positions. Other banks in the market noticed something was wrong. Each time, Leeson deflected with partial truths, forged documents, and the confidence of someone producing spectacular profits. And each time, management in London chose to believe the comfortable lie, rather than investigate the uncomfortable truth. On the trading floor in Singapore, Leeson's colleagues began to notice changes. He'd arrive at the office before dawn and leave after midnight. His eyes were bloodshot. He'd lost weight. He'd snap at staff over minor issues. The pressure of maintaining $1 billion lie was destroying him from the inside. Late at night, alone in his office, he'd stare at his screens watching the losses pile up. Knowing that every morning he woke up, he'd have to face another day of pretending everything was fine. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own creation, and the only way out was to keep doubling down, keep hoping for a miracle that would never come. This is the psychology of the rogue trader, not a master criminal, but a desperate man caught in a web of escalating lies, each one requiring a bigger lie to cover it up. The money and greed that drove his early decisions had been replaced by pure survival instinct, the animal fear of being exposed. By February 23, 1995, the losses had reached £827 million. The Nikkei wasn't recovering. His positions were so underwater, there was no mathematical possibility of recovery. That morning, Leeson came into the office, cleared some personal items from his desk, and typed a short resignation letter. Then he and his wife, Lisa, disappeared. They flew to Kuala Lumpur, then to Kota Kinabalu in Borneo, desperately trying to outrun what was coming. But you can't outrun the collapse of a 233-year-old institution. When Barings staff in Singapore discovered account 88888, the full horror became clear. The bank's head of treasury in London received the news by phone. He reportedly said just one word: "Fuck." Then he hung up and began making the calls that would end Barings Bank forever. But here's the twist that transforms this from a story about one rogue trader into something far darker. Nick Leeson wasn't the disease. He was the symptom. As investigators dug into Barings' collapse, they discovered something that should terrify anyone who trusts financial institutions with their wealth. The warning signs had been everywhere. In 1993, Barings' internal audit team had submitted a report explicitly warning that Singapore's operations had excessive concentration of power in Leeson's hands. They recommended separating his trading and settlements roles. Management ignored it. In 1994, another audit raised concerns about the lack of oversight and risk controls. Again, nothing was done. The Bank of England had questions about Barings' funding of the Singapore operation. Barings assured them everything was fine. CMEX, the Singapore exchange, had contacted Barings multiple times about Leeson's enormous positions. Each inquiry was deflected. The truth was that senior management at Barings didn't want to look too closely at their golden goose. They were making too much money from Leeson's reported profits to risk discovering they were fake. The collapse exposed the rotting foundation beneath the marble facade of British banking aristocracy. Barings had survived for over 2 centuries, not because of brilliant risk management, but because of its conservative, boring approach to banking. But in the 1980s and 90s, as financial markets became more complex and lucrative, Barings abandoned its cautious heritage. They wanted the profits of aggressive investment banking without building the controls necessary to manage the risks. They hired working-class traders like Leeson, not because they were competent, but because they were cheap and hungry. Then, they gave these traders enormous power without oversight, seduced by the wealth they generated. This is the dark truth about many financial institutions. The real business scandal isn't that fraud happens. It's that organizations actively create the conditions for fraud to flourish. They disable the alarms, ignore the warnings, and reward the very behaviors that will eventually destroy them, because in the moment, those behaviors are profitable. On March 2nd, 1995, German police arrested Nick and Lisa Leeson at Frankfurt Airport as they attempted to board a flight to London. Leeson later said he was almost relieved. The running was over. The nightmare could finally end. He was extradited to Singapore, where he pleaded guilty to fraud and deception. The judge sentenced him to 6.5 years in prison. In Changi Prison, Leeson was diagnosed with colon cancer. He later wrote that part of him wondered if the cancer was his body's way of punishing him for what he'd done. He survived both the cancer and the prison sentence, eventually being released in 1999. Today, he works as a public speaker, warning about the dangers of unchecked risk-taking in financial markets. The irony is almost too perfect. The man who destroyed a bank now makes his living telling other banks how to avoid his mistakes. But what happened to everyone else? This is where the story becomes truly infuriating. Peter Baring, the chairman, resigned in disgrace, but faced no criminal charges. The senior executives who ignored audit reports and failed to implement basic oversight. Most found comfortable positions at other financial institutions. The Bank of England, which was supposed to regulate Barings, faced criticism, but no real consequences. Meanwhile, 1,200 Barings employees lost their jobs overnight. The 233-year legacy of Britain's oldest merchant bank was erased. ING Group bought the ruins for £1 and eventually absorbed it completely. Today, the Barings name exists only in history books and business school case studies, a lesson in what happens when greed, incompetence, and willful blindness converge at the highest levels of wealth and power. The financial mystery of Barings Bank asks uncomfortable questions that the industry still struggles to answer. How many other Nick Leesons are out there right now, hiding losses in secret accounts? How many financial institutions are willfully ignoring red flags because the profits are too good? How many organizations have created the perfect conditions for their own destruction and just don't know it yet? In the years since Barings collapsed, we've seen the pattern repeat with disturbing regularity. Jérôme Kerviel at Société Générale in 2008, 4.9 billion euros in losses. Kweku Adoboli at UBS in 2011, $2.3 billion in losses. The London Whale at JP Morgan in 2012, $6.2 billion in losses. Each time, investigators discover the same pattern. Enormous risk-taking, inadequate oversight, ignored warnings, and management that chose profits over prudence until it was too late. The real lesson of Barings isn't about rogue traders. It's about rogue institutions that create the rogues they later claim to be shocked by. There's a deeper truth buried in this real-life business story about the nature of financial systems and human psychology. Nick Leeson's first hidden loss was £20,000, a rounding error in the world of banking. If he'd reported it immediately, he might have received a reprimand, maybe a demotion. Instead, he covered it up, and that small decision set him on a path that ended with £827 million in losses and the destruction of a centuries-old institution. This is the mathematics of catastrophe. exponential escalation hidden behind the facade of normality. Every day, Leeson came to work, smiled at colleagues, made trades and reported profits. He was feeding a monster in the basement that was growing larger by the hour. The same is true in corporate culture everywhere. The small compromises, the ethical corners cut, the warnings dismissed, the inconvenient questions ignored. Each one seems insignificant in the moment, but they compound, they metastasize, until one morning you wake up and discover the entire structure has been hollow for years. The Barings collapse also revealed something unsettling about the stock market secrets and financial systems we trust with our wealth. One 28-year-old trader, working alone in a cramped office 6,000 miles from headquarters, was able to bring down a bank that had financed the Napoleonic Wars. He did it with relatively simple fraud, hiding losses in a secret account that anyone with basic auditing skills could have discovered. No sophisticated hacking, no complex financial instruments, just lies, forged documents, and management that didn't want to look too closely. If it was that easy in 1995, what's possible today with algorithmic trading, dark pools, and infinitely more complex financial instruments? The answer is that we don't know, and that should terrify us. The financial system operates on trust that the numbers are real, that the oversight is functioning, that someone is watching. Barings proved that trust is often misplaced. In the end, account 88,888 became more than just a hidden ledger of losses. It became a symbol of everything wrong with financial culture in the late 20th century. The obsession with short-term profits over long-term stability, the hero worship of young traders making improbable returns, the aristocratic complacency of old institutions, believing they were too prestigious to fail, and the willful blindness of management that didn't want to know how the sausage was made, as long as it tasted good. The number 88,888, so lucky in Chinese culture, became a curse that destroyed everyone who touched it. Nick Leeson spent 6 years in prison and the rest of his life as a cautionary tale. Barings. Bank ceased to exist. Thousands lost their jobs, and the financial industry learned just enough to make the same mistakes again, with different names. The billionaire secrets and entrepreneurship secrets revealed by Barings' collapse are stark. Success without oversight is a catastrophe waiting to happen. Profit without accountability is a bomb with a long fuse. And organizations that reward results without questioning methods are building their own execution chambers. Nick Leeson destroyed Barings Bank, but Barings Bank created Nick Leeson. They gave him power without oversight, fed his ego with praise and bonuses, and ignored every warning sign until the moment of collapse. In the dark business documentary of financial history, Leeson is the villain in the story. But the real monsters were wearing expensive suits in London boardrooms, too arrogant to believe their empire could fall, and too greedy to stop it from happening. Today, if you walk through the city of London, you won't find any trace of Barings Bank. The brass plaques have been removed. The name has been absorbed into corporate history. 2 centuries of banking legacy, of financing empires and wars, of serving royalty and building industries, all of it reduced to a business school case study titled How Not to Manage Risk. The rise and fall was complete, and somewhere in all those ashes is a lesson that the financial world still refuses to fully learn. The most dangerous risk isn't in the markets. It's in the people and systems we trust to manage them. Nick Leeson didn't destroy Barings with genius or sophistication. He destroyed it with basic fraud that went undetected because nobody wanted to detect it. The billions lost weren't stolen by a criminal mastermind. They evaporated because management chose willful blindness over uncomfortable truth. The final, chilling irony of this financial mystery is that Nick Leeson's note, "I'm sorry," was more honest than anything Barings executives said in the aftermath. While they deflected blame, claimed they'd been deceived, and portrayed themselves as victims of a rogue employee, Leeson at least acknowledged what he'd done. He owned his catastrophe. The men in London never did. They went to their graves believing they were the victims of extraordinary bad luck, rather than the architects of institutional suicide. And that, perhaps, is the darkest truth this story reveals. The people who destroy empires rarely understand that they've done so. They believe, until the very end, that they were doing everything right, that the collapse was someone else's fault, that they couldn't possibly have seen it coming. But the warning signs were everywhere. They just chose not to look. In February 1995, account 88,888 didn't just record the death of a bank. It documented the death of an era, the final proof that old prestige and aristocratic names couldn't protect institutions from the new realities of global, electronic, 24-hour financial markets. Barings had survived Napoleon and Hitler. It couldn't survive Nick Leeson and a computer terminal in Singapore. The weapon that destroyed it wasn't violence or conspiracy. It was greed, incompetence, and the fundamental human weakness of believing comfortable lies, instead of investigating uncomfortable truths. 233 years of history ended not with a bang, but with a buried ledger of losses that nobody wanted to find, until it was far, far too late. And somewhere in the shadows of every financial institution in the world, there may be another account 88,888 waiting to be discovered. The only question is when. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.